03459 811111. A landmark fracking ruling is expected within the next half an hour. It really is make or break day for fracking in this country today. The Community Secretary Sajid Javid is expected to make a final ruling on 2 fracking applications. Now, they're in Lancashire, but the decision is being closely watched here in the southeast too. This morning, the boss of Cuadrilla, the chief executive of the energy firm, said there are 2 choices: we frack or we import gas. And for his money, fracking is better than importing gas. He says we need gas. The country's running out of gas. Without some form of energy development, we're going to end up importing all our fuel from overseas. We've seen that just last week with a ridiculous situation where Scotland is importing shale gas from America, which he describes as frankly crazy. Are those the only 2 options? 03459 811111. He also says the impact of a fracking producing site is, he says, less frankly than a wind farm. Do you see it like that? Is fracking the way forward? You remember under David Cameron, we were told the government was going to go all out for shale. Be interesting to see whether they do this morning, won't it?
Call Jules 03459 811111.
Text us on 81333, starting your message with Kent.
Email julia@bbc.co.uk.
Or get involved via Facebook at BBC Radio Kent Official and Twitter at BBC Radio Kent.
Julia George.
BBC Radio Kent.
It's all here.
Lawrence is our first caller, and Lawrence is in Hastings. Nice to have you with us. Good morning to you, Lawrence. So if you had to make a choice between the 2, fracking or importing gas, what would you go for?
Fracking, because it's here, it's going to be far cheaper than importing here, and that's the way forward as far as I'm concerned.
Is it just those 2 choices? I mean, there are other ways of generating energy, aren't there?
Well, you've got wind farms, which I don't think are as efficient as... They're only as efficient as when the wind's about. The thing is, with fracking, or with any fuel problems, all these people that are against it, the day they switch their lights on and they don't work, then they start having other thoughts about things. And that could happen. I mean, I don't know whether we're still importing. We used to import electricity from France at certain times of the day. I don't know whether that still happens. So, obviously, we're not self-sufficient in fuel, in our own fuel.
I would question the premise of the fracking boss, that it is as simple as fracking or importing gas, though. I mean, we all know that this country has underinvested in nuclear, for instance, in recent years. We all know there are other methods of producing energy, and of course there's all the ideas around reducing our energy need as well. So is it as simple as gas that we find under the ground ourselves and force out under high pressure, or gas we import?
Well, for years and years we've mined coal, and to mine coal they used to use explosives under the ground to mine coal. The same for gypsum, and which has been going on for years. So they're talking about the problems with pressurising the underneath, and it's going to cause problems. So could have different explosions underground when they were...
You're right, and perhaps it did contaminate water supplies, and
yes, possibly,
people did die, didn't they, in coal mining
exactly,
accidents.
Yeah.
So, but that doesn't reassure me. That just makes me think that we have for a long time done things underground that are quite dangerous.
Yeah, well, as I said before, we'd still be living in mud huts because everything we use is extracted from the ground. We wouldn't have any roads because all the materials for roads come out of the ground. Houses, the clay for bricks comes out of the ground. We'd still be living in mud huts.
But I suppose, Lawrence, the difference is how you extract it.
Well, that's true.
If you can just remove it by digging it up, I guess that the anti-fracking protesters would say it's about the chemicals used, the vast quantities of water, the danger to the fact that this is a very company, Cuadrilla, who had to stop drilling in the past. I think that was also in Lancashire, wasn't it? Because of minor earthquakes.
Balcombe in Sussex, they stopped them, didn't they? But they said about minor earthquakes in Lancashire, but...
None of that worries you?
No, not really.
What if they highlighted a site near Hastings, close to your home?
No, I'd welcome it, because if it was going to make my fuel 30% or cheaper, I'd welcome it.
Lawrence, thanks for your time this morning. Good to talk with you. That's Lawrence in Hastings, who does not have a problem with fracking. Well, we can put his point about turning the light switch and the lights don't come on. That's Lawrence's own point. Let's put it to Julie Wassmer in Whitstable, who's anti-fracking. Julie, nice to have you with us. Good morning to you.
Good morning, George.
So let's just pick up on that point Lawrence made for the people who are against fracking. What happens, he says, when you go to turn your lights on and they don't come on because we've run out of energy?
Fracking isn't going to save any gap in energy at all. You know, the experience in America of fracking showed that only about 5% of the reserves was actually recoverable, and that's likely to be far lower here because of the geology. It's going to be more difficult to get it out of the ground.
But when we talk in percentages, it would be better to talk in actual amounts, wouldn't it? Because even 5% of what they have in America has generated an enormous amount of money and energy for the Americans. So while percentages make it sound small, the actual amount is large, isn't it?
Well, I think you have to look at when it's generated money. At the moment, the industry is it's financially unviable in America because of the debts that were racked up during the actual drilling process. Those US players are carrying a huge amount of debt now, and the vast amounts of reserves which companies here boast in their press releases are precisely that. They're estimates for investors. That's all. So there's no promise of anything saving us here. But I think what we have to weigh against this is the tremendous cost that's going to be paid by communities that have to live alongside this. That's why they don't want it.
And what would you say? Because there are all sorts of things that are quoted, including, you know, right down to the movements of trucks to and from the site, which Cuadrilla will then argue back against, saying it's only going to be 25 trucks a day. It would only be for a maximum of 6 weeks spread out over a 2-year period. These things are never permanent, are they?
Okay, well, I think the clearest way I can get this across is that the government has backed fracking. We've always said that they backed the wrong horse in the energy race. But also there was a government DEFRA report. You know, it's a government report which was brought out. It was redacted in 62 sections. It was on the rural impacts from fracking. And those redactions were finally revealed after information came from Greenpeace and the Information Commissioner. And so we were able to see those. Those were sections that were hidden from public view. And in those, it said, you know, some of those said there would be a fall in property values, but higher insurance costs for residents to cover such events as explosion on site. It also said that environmental damage had occurred from leakage of waste fluids, that contaminated surface water can affect human health via the consumption of contaminated wildlife, livestock or agricultural products. And finally, increased industrialization may be brought to previously tranquil environments with rural businesses that rely on clean air, land, water, suffering losses in agriculture, tourism, organic farming, hunting, fishing, outdoor recreation. I mean, I could go on, but that's just some of what people will expect, and that's from a government report. This isn't scaremongering, this is the government, and that's what...
But none of those things are going to happen. Those are all these reports have to cover the very widest possibilities, don't they? And we're talking about possibilities. I think it would be dangerous for me to say those things you are reading out are all going to happen to any location where fracking occurs.
Well, I think what you have to do, when you have something that is so potentially damaging, not just to local economies, but to tourism, you know, these Lancashire sites are so close to Blackpool. You also have a scenario where, you know, in Kent, when we campaigned successfully against any fracking in Kent, the CPRE, the Campaign for Protection of Rural England, hydrogeologist Graham Warren warned that the chalk aquifer here, which supplies up to 90% of our county's water, was at the risk of irreversible contamination from fracking. So I think at what point, Jules, do we say the costs, the potential costs from this industry, this frack it and see policy, is not the way that we should be going?
So which horse do you back in the energy race, Julie?
I believe that the government should always have invested in renewables. I think it's completely ironic that, you know, David Cameron, he boasted that this was going to be the greenest government ever, And then he made it easier for communities to oppose renewables than fracking. And also, this is the issue of democracy here. It was a Brexit vote, for example, Jules. 50% of the country were for Brexit, 50% or just under were against it. But that decision was democratically, the government acknowledged that decision. It isn't reversing that decision. Those councillors in Lancashire, they studied for months and months, literally tens of thousands of pieces of evidence, and they reached the democratic decision to oppose those applications.
And yet their officers, who are the real experts, recommended accepting one of those applications.
The democratic decision. Well, we believe that that those officers, that pressure was applied to them. But what we're seeing here, regardless, is that the government have intervened in a democratically reached decision, and that leaves those people there at risk from this industry where no precautionary principle is being observed here. That's what we ask for, to weigh the costs against that community. The community whose democratically elected councillors took that decision to oppose it. They were informed. And that has just been ridden roughshod by the government intervening here. And I just, what the government's done is it's put itself on a collision course with so many people in this country who really just want, all they care for is for their jobs and for the health of their children and their family. In Lancashire, Jules, it's the dairy farmers there too who are opposing this. And that's because fracking will bring health risks, not to people just locally, but to people all over this country with the movement of agriculture.
But I think we need to be careful, Julie, about possibilities rather than actualities. The idea that you're saying that if this fracking goes ahead, that dairy cattle will be contaminated, is, going back to that report, one of the possibilities.
But we already have seen what the costs were in every country where fracking has taken place. In the farms of Pennsylvania, there are areas there which have really been given over. They're called sacrificial zones to the industry. They are areas which are beyond remediation. And so the land was literally just bought up and it's just been left. And it's the same as Graham Warren saying, once an aquifer is contaminated to all intents and purposes, that is irreversible. These are what we are facing. Those risks are far too great, but we do know, we have got the evidence from America, we have got evidence from Australia, and, we assert that fracking cannot be regulated safely.
Julie,
if the industry came close to it, it would become financially unviable. And in the US, the companies were exempted by the government from the Safe Drinking Water Act in 2005. So here we know we've got the history before us. We should not be going down this road.
Julie, thank you very much. Julie's in Whitstable. I think her position on fracking is abundantly clear. Do you agree with Julie, or do you agree with Lawrence, who says this is the way forward, this is what we need to do, this is necessary, because we haven't invested in other sorts of energy? 03459 811111.